Kurt Rowland, welcome to the cameras of the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum, home of Dwight David Eisenhower. Happy to have you visit with us today. Eagle Communications, the guys I work for, happy to be here to help put your story on the record and give you a chance to speak about your military service, and lots of things we'll talk about as we get going here. But we just started down an interesting piece of your conversation, and you're a former Marine.
Former Marine.
So how does one be a former Marine and a current major in the U.S. Army? Tell us that story.
I guess, well, I enlisted in the Marine Corps after I had been in school for a little while, and things weren't going the way I wanted in school. I wasn't disciplined enough, I don't believe, to really do well. And I decided, you know what will help my discipline? I'll join the Marines. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps, did my time, and then got out. And had no plans on serving again. But at the time, I was having a hard time getting money for college. I was accessing the GI Bill.
Right.
And it hadn't really kicked in yet, and I started exploring other options. I started thinking, okay, what about being a Marine officer? So I explored that option. They have a platoon leaders course that they offer. It's a summertime gig, your junior and senior year of college, but there's really no money benefit behind it. And I just happened across a friend in college that I'd known for a while, and he was an Army cadet, and he had been a Marine, and told me that I could transfer over and into the Army, and the Army would help pay for school, and he talked about all the benefits. So I went the next day and talked to the recruiter. They pulled me out of the inactive reserve and put me in the Army National Guard, and I contracted with the Army from there on out, and then commissioned, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So. Have they turned you into an Army guy yet?
Absolutely. The Army, yeah, I have enjoyed every minute of my service in the Army. I enjoyed the Marine Corps too, but the Marine Corps, in those days, it was needs of the Marine Corps took precedence over everything else. And the Army does that too, but they try to balance what you would desire. So.
Yeah.
I think having a little more money in the budget helps out.
Yeah, that I'm sure that's true. What years were you in the Marine Corps?
92 to 96.
Those were some tough budgetary years on the armed forces. Where are you from?
Birmingham, Alabama.
Birmingham, Alabama, the southern steel city.
It is.
Yeah. Red dirt and red iron.
Red dirt and red iron, the Iron City. Yeah. Hadn't been that for a long time, though.
I was there not quite a year ago now. Yep.
It's the medical community has really done a lot to revitalize that whole. Without UAB and without the medical community, I don't know what would happen after U.S. Steel bought most of the rights in Birmingham out. It would be an interesting place, but it's a great town. I don't know if I'll retire there, but I'm proud to call it my original home.
Went from there to where?
Went from there to college, Jacksonville State University, then the Marines, and then back to college, and then back to the same college. And then first assignment in the Army was the 101st up at Fort Campbell. Served 2 years there, and then went to Korea. Served on at the JSA in Korea, right on the DMZ there.
Right.
And then went to the advanced course for the Captain's Career Course is what they call it now. And then went to Florida. The Florida Ranger Camp, was a Ranger instructor for a couple years. Then I did that gig in the hopes of being one of the members of the Stryker Brigade up at Fort Lewis. They were starting the Strykers up at that time.
Right.
And I wanted to be in that after it had matured a little bit, but still in the kind of ground floor. And things worked out, and I was able to get assigned there. And I was at Fort Lewis for almost 5 years. staff,
Yeah.
company commander, two deployments to Iraq, all with the same brigade, and then left there, went to Fort Polk as an OC, and now I'm here.
Okay, we'll go back through there.
Okay.
Reading through your bio, you've probably got the best collection of alligator boots known to mankind, since how you
I spent some time in the swamp.
spent some time
Yeah, I
in the
have.
swamp as an instructor, so you surely had a lot of raw material to make boots from.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Wandering around.
Lots of snakes. Killed lots of snakes.
I'll bet. I don't like snakes.
I don't
I
like
do
them either.
not like snakes. Have I made that clear?
We
You can
have
tell
a,
all the alligator stories you want, but we don't talk about
They have a snake team down in Florida that's all. I don't know what their qualifications are, but I know
They're nuts.
They're pretty qualified and they're nuts.
Yeah, they have to be.
And they used to get on to me all the time for killing snakes. They're like, "Don't kill the snakes, catch one for me." I'm like, "I'm not touching them, man."
There's no such thing as a good snake.
No.
No, there's levels of bad, but no such thing. So tell us a little bit about that. We're here for your story, right? And so much of what the people behind the lens just get snippets of Army life. They don't understand your job. They don't understand your qualifications. They don't understand your training. We're here to put this into the records of the archives of the Eisenhower Presidential Library for people to sit down and look at for the next 100 years. So that's, you're particularly proud of that, the work you did down in those leadership positions. It says on your bio. And share that with us.
Ranger School is a 3-phase school. It's a leadership school. They conduct first phase at Fort Benning, second phase in the mountains up in Dahlonega, Georgia, and the third phase is called the run phase. It's the Florida phase. I found it particularly or particularly fun to be in that phase I was a training team OIC. So basically I had a group of Ranger instructors, I think 9 total, that worked for me, and we would train Rangers on patrolling techniques in the swamp phase and on leadership. I enjoyed the one-on-one face-to-face time that I had with those students, and most of the guys, 99.9% of the guys that I graded were all lieutenants or captains about to go back out to the force and lead units. And it was the last chance to really put a stamp on maybe their techniques. I don't know that particular job had all that much impact. Most of them probably won't ever remember my name because they saw me for 24, 48 hours. Right. But hopefully I taught them something, just based on their time there. I like to feel like I felt like Ranger School was kind of a suck it up fest when I went through it, and I didn't remember learning a whole lot about anything but myself. I learned a lot about myself, and I wanted to try to teach the students something from just my experience. Now a lot of those kids had, or a lot of those students had, a lot more experience than I did because when I was there it was 2001 and 2003. So a lot of the guys that had been in on the early part of the Afghan campaign and the early parts of Iraq, they had more, they had combat experience than I did not at the time. So it was interesting and challenging to try to
maneuvering with hot lead.
But the freedom that you had, the freedom that the chain of command gave us down there, as long as we were operating within safety left and right limits, we were free to do a lot of things to teach students. So I really enjoyed that. I didn't, and I think our team had a good reputation. We did not haze people for no reason or anything stupid like that. So we got good feedback from the students. So it was a rewarding time. And as far as, it's really my only instructor time, so it was a very rewarding experience.
When a person has something and can give it to somebody else as an instructor, that adds value that goes beyond yourself. That is an opportunity.
Yeah, it was, and you learn a lot too. I learned a lot watching what they did. Every time you watch somebody do something, you learn something new. So
that's not true. People who think that way learn something every time you watch somebody. There are a lot of people that watch people do something, never learn anything.
Wow. I never thought about it like that. I guess that's right.
Deployed combat twice with Stryker Brigade both times?
With 3-2 SBCT, 3rd Brigade, 2nd ID. It was actually the first Stryker Brigade to stand up.
Right.
And I joined that formation right at the end of their certification. They had just finished going to JRTC and NTC within a couple months of each other to get certified to be the Army's first Stryker Brigade, and they were getting ready to deploy. So I was there about 3 months before they deployed to Iraq the first time.
Let's tell folks behind the camera what a Stryker is.
It is an 8-wheeled armored vehicle that carries 8 dismounted infantrymen inside it, 11 total people. And it got a lot of press back then because people were worried it wouldn't be the vehicle of the future or what have you. From my experience, that is one of the best organized formations in our Army. At the brigade level, you've got 3 infantry battalions, as opposed to some of the other modular forces now. You only have 2 infantry battalions and 1 CAV, or 1 RISTA squadron. But you have 3 infantry battalions and a RISTA squadron, so you really got 4 maneuver battalions. And then within those battalions, a maneuver company, I had 170 men in my company most of the time, and that's a lot of bodies for a rifle company. So you're talking, when you're in a fight, boots on the ground, you're putting out almost 100 guys into the fight on the ground, and you couple that with vehicles, and they've got special skills too. You've got your own snipers in the company, you've got your own mortarmen who can shoot 120s or 60 millimeter mortars depending on the mission.
Right.
They can shoot both, or a combination. So you've got a lot of tools at your disposal as a company commander that I found very challenging, very rewarding, and it was a time of my life. Just being a part of that formation as a staff officer, as a company commander, and as a staff officer again at the end of it was very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, that's out of Fort Lewis, Washington, wasn't
Correct.
it?
Yes. There's 3 Stryker brigades at Fort Lewis, so it's really the center for the Strykers, even though we have other Strykers and all the other brigades. The Stryker community was one of the first communities to really integrate and talk to each other. We took over Mosul from the 101st during my first tour, and it stayed in Stryker hands. Different formations would come over from different places, and Mosul stayed with Strykers Stryker stayed in Mosul for almost 4.5 years. So
Is that right?
there was a lot of continuity, and we were talking with each other back and forth, and a lot of other formations are doing that too. But from what I was told, we were one of the first to do that collaboration. So it was, and there's a lot of shared information, a lot of shared lessons learned, a lot of company commanders from this brigade talking to this brigade. Company commanders talking to each other. On more than 3 occasions, I got together with fellow company commanders from other brigades, and we learned from each other. What are the challenges he's facing? It was just a great experience.
The modern warfighting machine has to change far more quickly than we used to, in order to be able to adapt to what's on the ground, I would assume.
I had 18 months between my 2 deployments, and it was a different war altogether.
Is that right?
It had changed that much. When I was there the first time, both times I was in Iraq, generally the unit I was with was above ground. We did not own ground for very long periods of time. We'd go into hot spots, help clean up, and then go to the next fight. The first time I was there, we started off in Samara helping out with the 4th ID, Operation Ivy of Blizzard. Fairly kinetic fight. And then we were only there about a month. We went and relieved in place with 101st Airborne up in Mosul. My battalion was down south of Mosul in an area that did not have a whole lot of activity as far as significant activity. So as soon as Sadr had his uprising in the south, we launched south to down to Najaf. As a part of it, they created a brigade. We were part of that brigade. We road marched in our vehicles down to Najaf. I don't think any other formation in Iraq could do that, fighting our way the whole way. Went to Najaf, helped out there for a couple of days. They decided they didn't want to go after and they didn't want to go kill Sadr. So then they launched us up to Baghdad to secure convoys going through Baghdad, because at that time Sadr's forces were basically shutting down all traffic. Once that was complete, we went to Talafar. Before Talafar was cleared by Colonel McMaster's brigade, we were there about a year ahead of that. We cleared Talafar as a brigade. We went from about, I don't remember how many SIGACs a day, it was at least 10 a day, down to 0 right before we ripped out. We ripped out with another Stryker brigade, turned over control of Talafar, and but most of the fights, my first tour, were large fights with lots of bad guys. I mean, they would mass on you, hundreds of guys, and we'd just mow them down. You know, it wasn't really much of a fight. We lost a few soldiers. I mean, that's kind of what happens. But for the most part, I mean, they were skilled, but they weren't like I saw the second time.
Right.
The second tour, I started off in Anbar Province, working for the Marines for a little bit, and then they did Operation Together Forward 2 in Baghdad, so we went out to Baghdad and worked in the Al-Dora area, and my company owned a part of Al-Hadar, just on the southwest portion of Baghdad. And that was, you talk about full spectrum operations. We'd be cleaning the streets one day, hiring people, you know, doing a project. The next day we're fighting. It was a very complex. It was really the center of, at that time in 2006, it was Sunni on Shia violence. It was really, that's where Sunni and Shia sect lines came together in that part of the city, and there was a lot of dead bodies every day from the violence between the two. So holding those two apart, figuring out who was responsible for it, targeting one group then targeting the other. Very challenging problem set for a rifle company to deal with. But we did that, and then I changed command January of '07 and went and worked on the brigade staff. And at the time, that's when the surge was happening. And my brigade, part of my brigade, was clearing Baghdad, sections of Baghdad, to bring in surge forces under the clear hold build. So we'd do the clearing, another unit would come in and do the holding and building in an area, and we'd just clear, and we cleared a large portion of Baghdad in that fashion. Around that time, one of our battalions was launched to Bakuba, where when the surge happened, a lot of the bad guys in Baghdad went to Bakuba. They planted the Islamic State of Iraq flag in Bakuba and said, "This is ours." A lot of the guys from Anbar Province had gone to Bakuba too. My old battalion, 5th Battalion, 20th Infantry, had gone to Bakuba to, as part of the surge against the Baghdad belts, and they were helping out 3-1 Cav. They quickly got into a very hard fight up there, and we lost our battalion. I wasn't a part of the battalion at the time. I call it our battalion just because I was a part of them at one time. But they lost, I think, around 15 or 16 soldiers within a period of 4 or 5 months. So very bloody, and it touched all of us in the brigade, and we were like, we want to go help out our brothers. And finally we got permission to go up there and help out. General Odierno sent us up there with the resources we needed. And as a brigade, we conducted Operation Arrowhead Ripper and fought our way in. Very kinetic at first, but we cleared the city, and as we cleared it, we did a lot of the other very complex counterinsurgency stuff that you need to do to build a city. I think we would have been capable of doing that early on in the tour, but I think at that point in the tour, we were right at the end of our tour, right at the end of 15 months. We were an extremely capable organization, had a lot of experience, had seen a lot of things in Iraq as an above ground force, and that type of fight kind of fit us just right. So a lot of good successes there. I could talk about Arrowhead Ripper for days.
Well, you know, because you can, it's important for the folks behind the lens to understand the complexity. You talk about the complexity. They're going, somebody said, what's he mean? Why is it complex to conduct counterinsurgency operations after you just cleared this area? Explain that. What's the mission?
Well, first, I guess to describe that, the first part I'll talk about is the enemy. The enemy we were facing in Bakuba were the most talented enemy I've seen in almost 30 months in Iraq. They would fire and maneuver like we would. They would build engagement areas just like we would. Every attack they'd hit you with was a complex attack. They knew what they were doing. They were I've heard it said before, and I think it fits. All the dead ones, or all the dumb ones, were already dead. So these were the best and brightest left of the Al Qaeda, the hardcore guys left. Now, to kind of build on that, there was a group of former Sunni insurgents that were ready to come over and work with us to get Al Qaeda out. Al Qaeda had come into the city and had instituted, in a large portion, Sharia law. Didn't allow men to smoke, no vices. and there was evidence of torturing people. There's all kinds of things that they did that the people did not like. So they, the people at first welcomed them in, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, these Al Qaeda guys, they're not all that great. So there was a group of former Sunni insurgents who had fought many of us and probably killed some of our friends that decided, you know what, I'm gonna work with the Americans against these guys. So organizing that was a big challenge, and the unit that was already there, 520, had done the legwork on a lot of that. So that was kind of, it was a little more than in its infancy. It was maturing, and we needed to come along and mature that a little bit more. Next, you had severe economic issues in the town because Al Qaeda had cut off all supplies to the town. So the people were not really getting any food. They were not, the basic necessities of life, water and food, were not readily available unless they farmed it or they got it on the black market. Supplies coming from Baghdad had been shut off for months. It was seen as a Sunni stronghold. The Shia that controlled the government in Baghdad were like, well, I'm not really going to support them. That was part of the problem, and part of the problem was they'd get ambushed when they came in. So nothing was getting in. So that was another problem that we had to deal with. And it turned out there was a kind of worse than any other place I've seen. There's a humanitarian stuff that we needed to do. So the tactical problem was to kick Al Qaeda out, and we didn't have the force structure we desired, but we had almost what we needed to properly do that. We learned a lot of lessons. Fallujah had happened in 2004, so we learned lessons from that. I think First AD had a very successful operation in Ramadi about 6 months before we did Arrowhead Ripper, so we learned a lot from that. We studied both of those.
Had some wins from those.
Yeah, we studied both of those on what to do and what maybe not to do, and then we created our tactical plan based on that. So our tactical plan was basically to surprise them. We attacked from the march. We didn't want to let the Al Qaeda see us build forces because we're really going after some of the leadership. We did some precision strikes early on to start the whole thing off, kind of like the Iraq War started off. And then we came in with our forces, tried to lock down a portion of the city that we thought was the worst part, and then proceeded to clear from south to north and north to south. So we did it in two directions. Once the two forces met in the middle, then we went over to the east side of the city, excuse me, and cleared that side. And then we did smaller operations for a couple more months until we felt like we had achieved a lot of our tactical success. Now, on the humanitarian side, while we're doing that, we're trying to build the local government too. And there was already elected officials, but they were pretty much incompetent. So a lot of our leadership was meeting with those individuals, trying to figure out how to best, provide a government for the city of Bakuba. Concurrently with that, the former Fedayeen personnel that came over to work with us, we're figuring out how to legitimize those guys, signing contracts saying that, I won't fight against the Americans and I'll eventually join the police force or I'll eventually join the Army, that sort of thing. So figuring that out, figuring out how, when you see a guy, we know not to shoot him, so we had to put him in some uniforms and stuff like that. And then the humanitarian side, our DCO Deputy Commanding Officer for the brigade, did some great work in getting humanitarian supplies up, getting just basic foodstuffs, propane, regular food and water up from Baghdad, and running that sort of stuff up into town. So, and as we did all that, what we found were a lot of the locals, a lot of the guys that we had been chasing that we didn't necessarily get during the initial assault, we'd get later on because the locals were talking to us. So it was a very complex operation. A lot of smart people figured out a lot of things, and I was just happy to be a part of that. A very small part of that.
Big turnaround in that country for the United States military during that time.
It was I knew in the summer of '06, if someone would have asked me if we were going to win the war, the positive side of me would have said, yeah, I think we will. But, the realist in me that was looking at all the problems I was seeing on a daily basis, I was like, I just don't see a way out of this. Well, when the surge happened, And you go out on patrol and you'd see, before the surge, you go out on patrol for 5, 6, 7 hours. You'd never see another coalition force. I mean, it was you all alone out there. And then when the surge happened, when it was in its full force, you couldn't drive anywhere in Baghdad or pretty much Iraq without seeing other coalition forces. So you knew if you ever got in trouble, there's somebody there to help you, number one. And number two, with all that force out there, this place has got to be getting better. And then I think we had the fortuitous advantage of having a lot of the former Saddam loyalists come over and say, you know what, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I've learned that Al-Qaeda is not all that great. I'm going to work with the Americans against Al-Qaeda.
Well, two things. I think they had an opportunity to learn that, but everybody wants to support a winning team, not a losing team. You went from what you had just described as a losing configured force to one that would win. They had to see that as well. You saw it.
Yeah.
They had to see it.
Yeah.
I
think they realized also that we weren't as bad as Al-Qaeda, and that was the key. I think, and that was another thing that I didn't talk about yet, but when I first showed up in 2006 and I took over my area in Al-Hadar and I started doing dismounted patrols and talking to folks, people told me a couple things. They said, one, we're so glad you're talking to us. It's great to be finally talking to Americans. And two, we're glad you're here because you're not as bad as the Sunni, if I was talking to Shia, or you're not as bad as the Shia. And we always get a fair shake from you guys.
Yeah.
So I think things had changed a little bit, to help some of the situation. Those guys, I look at it from the Iraqi perspective. What a tough life to go through.
I guess so.
So
you might explain that comment to the folks behind the lens. What a tough life to go through. What is the life they go through?
To be at war is constantly fearing for your life, especially if you're a civilian in the crossfire. As a combatant, you have the ability to really defend yourself, and you have the ability to be on the offensive and take be aggressive towards your enemy. Really set your enemy back if you're aggressive and you're doing all the right things. As a non-combatant, you're kind of in the middle of all that, so you don't know if you're going to get someone knocking down your door at 2 in the morning on accident. Sometimes that happens. You don't know if you're going to get caught in the crossfire of good guys and bad guys fighting. I can't imagine living like that. We in America, we take those things for granted, and until I saw it myself, I took it for granted. But to see it from their perspective, we would go in and conduct, and I want to be clear here, I consider a clearing operation by American standards to be pretty intrusive. You're talking about a foreign force coming in, locking down your street, and they're walking all through your house searching through your stuff. These people were so glad that we were there because their kids could go out and play in the street. They didn't care what we looked for in their house. We were respectful of their house, but they were so glad we were there. And I've got hundreds and hundreds of pictures of kids, climbing all over us, just having the time of their life because they had 5 minutes where they didn't have to fear for their life. And that made an impact on me. Our kids don't grow up like that. And until you see it firsthand, you don't really have an appreciation for it. I think it changes your outlook on things.
I want to ask you a question. It's not a political question. It's a Mr. Rowland question. You changed some kid's life for 5 minutes. You maybe made a change for a longer period of time, but you provided freedom to those kids and safety to those kids for a period of time by your actions.
Yeah, I would.
So, was it good for you to be there and do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The bell rings tomorrow.
I want to go back. There's a lot of reasons I want to go back. To me, serving in the military is a huge challenge. You never know. Every day is a challenge. You know what you're going to face, but it's something. Generally, in my line of work, I'm an infantryman. It's something you haven't done exactly the same way the day before. So I never get bored with what I'm doing. And guaranteed it's either a physical challenge, a mental challenge, or both. In almost every instance, and I enjoy challenges. I always have, and that's why I serve. Why would I want to go back? I think it's a challenge, and I enjoy making a small difference, if we can. I may be idealistic in that way.
I don't think so. First of all, I guess I don't think there are any small differences. If a difference is made, it can only be small in the presence of a small measurement of time. That child that you made a difference in for 5 minutes, his view of freedom of the world, his view of the United States as an agent of freedom in the world, do you or I have any way of knowing what his next 40 years of life, how it might impact his country?
No, we don't.
We have no way of knowing. Do the right thing and the outcomes may have to come later. Were you there during the election with the purple fingers?
No, I was not. That happened between my two tours. Okay. So I wasn't there for any election, but I saw some of the fruits of it. The country of Iraq is a fledgling democracy, and they're going through all the things that if you dig in our history books, they were there in our early history, but they're not really taught in public school. You got to kind of dig for the information, but of course we had some benefits. We didn't really start off like they did, and we didn't have the long history of Sunni versus Shia or what have you.
They're different.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with being different, but freedom is a natural state of mankind. It may look differently at the end, but no man naturally chooses to be without freedom.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And at the end of the day, I think all people want to do is, at the core of it, is just live, and be able to live safely and not worry about their life. So, it was good to be a part of that. It's good to continue to be a part of that. I'm sure I will deploy within the at least next year or 2 years. So I'm looking forward to that.
Is your wife looking forward to it?
I am married to an extraordinary woman. She knows what service is all about, even though she did not raise her hand herself. Do we ever argue about it? Absolutely. We're human. She would like to spend more time with me, and I would like to spend more time with her, but she knows that that's what I want to do, and she knows it's important, and she feels it's important. So, she's not looking forward to it. She wouldn't volunteer for it, but she knows how to do it, and having gone through it twice already, she knows what she's getting into. It's a significant emotional event for a husband and wife. We don't have kids. I couldn't imagine what it's like with kids, because I can only imagine it from my wife and my perspective. It's literally when you meet again after being gone. The first time I was gone for a little over 12 months. The second time I was gone for 14. After that time, both times, it's like being married all over again and going through the first 7 years of marriage within a year. You go through all emotions. You go through the honeymoon stage, and then you go into why aren't you putting the cap on the toothpaste, and all that stuff in an accelerated period. So it's highly stressful on a marriage. And I don't think the wives get enough credit for what they do. All wives volunteer in some way. And they're all volunteering their time, and not all, but a large number of wives volunteer, and they're having to deal with the home front too. They're dealing with when one of our soldiers dies, they're the ones dealing with the aftermath on the back end side, all the people that are crying.
They all the wives volunteer to be there to meet you on the plane when you come home. They volunteer to re-engage and try to be normal life.
Right.
That's a big raise your hand kind of event.
Absolutely. Knowing that you have something like that when you get home, I can't imagine that, or I can't explain really the joy you feel in your heart, but it really makes it all, I don't know, it just makes it all better when you get home. It's great to get off the plane and see your family there, and you know, they're still the same loving people that you remembered. But you do, you know, over a year, you almost forget who they are. I mean, at the end there, the last 4 or 5 months, that's part of, you know, my wife explains it best, and she's way more in touch with her emotional side than I am. But, you know, she talks about, you know, the first part of the deployment is it's like you're grieving. You go through the grieving process for however long you go through it, and then you come to acceptance. And then that person is kind of dead to you. I mean, to be quite blunt about it, it's kind of dead to you until you return. And then you return, and then you go through the whole, you know, the marriage thing again. But so, I mean, it's tough on families. If we can manage the time that we're gone a little differently, I think that would help us a lot. But I don't see any end in sight to it. So, you know, a year is. When I look at Vietnam vets, and I look at guys that did World War II, and I look at guys that did multiple tours in Korea, a year is a long time. 2 years is even longer. To do it all in one stretch is rough. I mean, to do you know, long time. I mean, it's rough.
No matter what the case is back then, or from North Africa to Berlin, or whether it's multiple tours in Iraq with rotating deployment, it's still folks like you standing between folks like me and folks like those other guys. And prior, a resident of that chair earlier today said, I'd rather fight them over there than fight them over here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I would too. I concur with that 100%. You know, if the ultimate testament that we're doing the right thing and we're doing well is that Americans' lives, their daily lives don't change a little bit. If my mother and father don't have to worry about getting on a plane and dying or whatever, or they feel safe driving down the road or whatever, or going to the store, if their lives don't change in a little bit, it's okay that they don't, and I'm not talking about my parents here, but it's okay that the average American maybe doesn't think about what we're doing. That's fine. That's what I want. It's when they're fearful for their life that's what I, you know, as a service person, I don't want any part of that. I don't want that to happen. So it's much better that we sacrifice over there and do what we do to make sure that doesn't happen here.
Kurt, thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Something we can do for you, you let us know.
Will do.